Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrien Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. Well, to begin with, let's take a look at the last couple of weeks of total accumulated precipitation. The bigger picture here has been the flow. We've had split flow out of the Gulf of Alaska, a northern branch coming in through the northern Rockies, a subtropical branch squeezing underneath it. They kind of meet together right here and then race on off to the north and east. And as they do that, we can see that there's a large section of the United States here that's been exceptionally wet. But the flow pattern has been lifting, and as a result of that, it's been wet but not exactly very cold. We'll see that in a few moments. But from east to west across the state of North Carolina, getting over to the coastal regions, we've had on average about 3 inches of rainfall in the last 14 days. But as you move west toward the Appalachians, well, there are some places there that have picked up over a foot of rainfall. If you just look inside this corridor here, this area has averaged 10 inches of rainfall with some pockets of 15 inches. So some of the questions we have to ask in this video pertain to, is this pattern going to change? That's what we really want to be discussing here. Well, going back 2 releases ago for the drought monitor back on February 6th, we were still dealing with at that time drier than average conditions that were right up along the coast. The latest drought monitor that came out last week, of course, has completely removed that, but you notice now drought is beginning to emerge in a larger and deeper section of California here in terms of the depth of the drought. If there's anything to be said about drought in the Carolinas, it's going to be a snow drought. So this looks at through February 13th, the accumulated snowfall departure compared to the 10-year average. And we can see here that much of the Appalachian Mountains, including the Carolinas here, are in a bit of a snow drought. 4 to, in some locations, over 10 inches below normal what we'd see so far this year. And just to show you what's going on out west, look at the Sierra Nevada here. We have most of the reporting stations between 50 and 70% of normal on snowfall. So there's a problem brewing in California. Now, why I keep talking about the coasts, North Carolina and California, is because if we're going to see a change in this pattern, it will manifest itself first in those 2 areas. And that's what I really want to be discussing here. Because for the beginning of this year, from the 1st all the way through the 14th, so last Friday, this is what our jet stream's been doing. We've had a large ridge sitting between Alaska and Hawaii, okay? And what's happened is the flow has gone around this ridge and targeted the Pacific Northwest. But because of this ridge here, the jet stream is kind of met from the south side of it and run straight up over the top of it and then curled around this deeper trough sitting over Greenland. So I'm going to ask you to really keep your eye on 3, or I guess I should say 4 locations in this video: Alaska, California, North Carolina, and Greenland. Keep those 4 kind of corners of our flow pattern of the atmosphere under your view in this video. Because what we've seen as a result of this upper level pressure pattern has been this surface pressure pattern. And the fact that we have been able to tuck so much cold air and very low pressure, see the map is showing pressure, but that's where the cold air is as well, into this area has been critical for keeping North Carolina on the warmer side of things throughout much of this winter. When I go back and remember 2019, the winter of 2019 and 2020, it's going to be the split flow out west. That's going to be the first thing. The very, very strong polar vortex, and also as a result of it, the strong Arctic oscillation, and then the fact that the North Atlantic has been stuck into this phase of the positive phase of the North Atlantic oscillation as well. Those have been the defining features of this winter. So that's when we come to those 4 corners again. Are we seeing any sort of a breakdown anytime soon? Because if it doesn't, we're going to continue to see massive storm systems like this race through the North Atlantic. This was over the weekend. The central pressure in that low was low enough to be a very, very powerful hurricane, even though this wasn't a hurricane. But look at what it did to this aircraft here, landing in on this runway with this strong crosswinds. They call this crabbing. This particular video just blows my mind. I have to fly quite a bit for work. I have never, ever flown and had to make a landing quite like this. So the pilot, just to keep targeting here right over the top of the runway, comes in at a crazy angle. And just watch this. The back skid in there and then just straightens it out. Wow, that is some incredible flying. But just to show you what those strong winds from those big North Atlantic storms have been doing. Okay, let's get back into our weather here. When we've seen cold air, it has come out of Alaska like we saw over the last 7 days, setting up shop in the midsection of the U.S. But we've really resisted having that cold air get all the way to the East Coast and stick around for anything more than a day or 2. And so that's why over the last 45 days, I mean, you can see it right here, the most coldest spot on Earth has really been Alaska and Greenland, and the eastern two-thirds of North America have been quite warm. So that's why we're going to watch this area, this area, this area, and that one. That's our target area for this video. So in the near term, what are our temperatures going to be doing? Well, this is Monday's departure from normals. We see across the state in general near average to slightly above average temperatures. As we play this forward, the next system emerges in the Central Plains, and still we're going to go through the beginning of this week with much above average temperatures here. Again, this is departure from normal, 6 to 15 degrees above average. As we get into Wednesday, that's when the cold front finally gets over toward us here, cooling us off middle of the week. And on Thursday, now we're talking about 6 to 10 degrees below average after a very warm start. But then look, there's Friday, Saturday into Sunday. So it's a warm start, cool finish, but it doesn't last long. Notice by the time we get to the end of the weekend, we've already begun to warm things back up again as a big ridge builds back into the flow here. But remember, we're thinking about the end of February, beginning of March as our pattern signal change. So to understand that, I got to take you right back up to the upper levels of the atmosphere. Now watch this with me, okay? As we play this forward, blues are troughs, red colors are ridges. I'm going to pause it right here. This is the main trough that sweeps through midweek this week, cooling things down for us by the end of the week. So there comes the trough toward the end of the week. But look at what's behind it, a big ridge right here. Now, after I get that past, that ridge goes out, giving us the warm up to our weekend. Look, I want you to see what's happening over Alaska, California. We're going to talk about South Carolina, or North and South Carolina in a moment, and then Greenland. Ready? Because I noticed that after we get past this weekend into early next week, the change happens first out west. You see, there was a trough. Let me step you back here. Look at the trough over Alaska. See the dark blue and green color? Okay, see it sliding into the west? As that happens, this is going to kick off midweek next week. So I'm talking about like the 25th, 26th, 27th. A big low pressure system in the midsection of the country is going to run straight toward the Great Lakes and then Maine. So we're going to go back on our roller coaster ride of temperatures. But watch this. As we finish up the month of February, remember the 4 regions I told you to watch? Okay, now look at them. This is the end of February. This ridge has pushed into the Gulf of Alaska, while a trough is set up over California. In the meantime, a broader trough has established itself across the eastern half of the country, which may mean more than just 1 or 2 days of cooler weather, maybe a few days of cooler weather setting up here. This could also mean a much more active pattern and maybe some snow to be talked about in the Appalachian Mountains. What's happened over Greenland? We'll see the ridge pushing in this area. All of this is signaling a pattern change for the beginning of March. The question is, will it last? Because we see now when looking at days 5 through 10, when that big ridge builds back in, the warmth returns. So that's why we see cooler than average temperatures staying here along our, the southern region of the United States, but we're rebounding toward the weekend here across the Carolinas because the colder air goes right back to where it has been. But look out here, day 10 through 15. Ridge pushes in here, and as that occurs, that colder air finally moves across the lower 48, possibly giving us for the end of February and beginning of March, maybe a few days, not just 1 or 2 days, but 3, 4, 5, 6 days of near average to cooler than average weather. Now, I say you need to be cautious about this, and I'm going to explain why in just a moment. But what about precipitation? Well, we see this lingering boundary sitting right in through here that we're going to be dealing with this next system that goes racing through the middle of this week, hence the wetter than average conditions. And then with that big trough coming out here, middle of next week, and then racing on off to the northeast, we're going to reinforce this area with more precipitation. So I see from Texas all the way to the Carolina coast showing up with wet anomalies through the next 10 days. So in the near term, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with some fog early this morning, so that's what your special weather statement is right here in this part of North Carolina. But fog in South Carolina, Georgia, getting down into Florida, and also over into Alabama as well. Over the next 5 days, though, you're going to see wetter than average conditions across this whole region. That's really going to hit the southern half of North Carolina with more rainfall. Take a look at it here, zooming in on the European model's forecast. As you move north, rainfall amounts are lighter. We see them getting below about 3/4 of an inch up in this area, but we could be adding, especially over here in the eastern part of the state, maybe another 3/4 to 1.5 inches of rainfall just by the time we get to Friday evening. And again, we have more systems coming next week. So we better talk about these systems and see their timing. So we're going to go straight to our operational European model. We're going to pause it right there. So throughout the beginning of this week, things are relatively dry. Okay, we had the precip that exited this morning off the East Coast, but then getting through Monday into Tuesday morning, it won't be until Tuesday afternoon and evening where we start to see the first low pressure system, which ran through the Great Lakes and is now sitting over Maine, leaves its frontal boundary sitting right in this area. Now, these frontal boundaries, these lingering frontal boundaries, as I call them, are often the result of sandwiching two high-pressure cells together. So there's one here off the page, and there's another one coming in out of the Canadian prairies. So right in between the two, well, the flow's coming like this and like that. So it squeezes right into this area. So Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, getting into Wednesday afternoon and evening, that's when we have the wetter conditions. So Tuesday night through Wednesday night, right into this area, looking for wetter than average conditions. Now after that, this is now getting into Thursday morning. Our next system is slowly forming right here from Texas all the way over to North Carolina. So watch, this is Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon and evening. Now with the colder air that is coming in, with this high pressure cell, we could be packing up some snow here in the Appalachian Mountains, and maybe don't be surprised if you see some wet snowflakes here in northern North Carolina getting up into Virginia. Now this is still tricky to pin down exactly if this is going to happen. It's going to be dependent on the time of day, especially, and how much cold air we can kind of get to dam up in this area. But we're missing the big high pressure cell here to give us the strong cold air damming that we would normally get to get ice and snow. The high pressure cell sitting over Iowa. So if we kind of just see that that's where things are going through the next 96 hours, watch this again with me. Ready? So system number one moves through midweek, get a quick break, and then toward Friday, Thursday night into Friday, we get the next round of precip before high pressure builds in. So see that? So the weekend appears to dry out. That's our drier, cooler weekend, drier, cooler start to the weekend, which rebounds by Sunday. But notice next Monday into Tuesday, we have another system coming right across the same area. We'll talk more about this in next week's update. So nothing seems to be slowing this pattern down in terms of precipitation. Looking only at week 2, remember the trough comes in here, pulls one system out, but we'll leave a lingering boundary in this area, which is why we continue to see the weather than average conditions when only looking at week 2, which gets us all the way out to the evening of March the 1st. All right, what's changing, if anything? Okay, line graph here showing you the global wind anomalies. Now, we've seen since January the rebounding of our global winds. Now, what does that mean? That means the atmosphere on the whole is really cranked up. The jet stream is moving quite fast. Lots and lots and lots of low pressure systems, and that's why I showed you over the last few weeks things have been so wet. That was the beginning of this video. Well, we've since seen the global winds collapse back down here toward normal, but they're expected to slowly rise back up again. So what I'm trying to say here is that looking just from this global wind perspective, I expect to see low pressure systems continue with some frequency, and I don't expect the whole of the atmosphere to become blocked up. Here's some other support for that. Out of the tropics, the MJO is currently sitting right here in phase 5 and 6, and it's expected to come back over here through null phase and maybe emerge over into phase 1 or 2. That would be supportive of the return to near average or cooler than average weather across the East Coast. But it's not as though it pops way out here deep into phase 7, 8, 8, 1, or 2. So it's very shallow in terms of its amplitude. We're not getting any help from the polar vortex. Through the next 10 days, it's expected to stay quite strong and sit and spin here over the North Pole. So this isn't true polar air that's coming in. It's just a bit of a pattern shift. So we come back to that idea again. Notice that at the beginning of this year, the ridge was here. We notice that by the time we get into, well, the beginning of March, that ridge slides over into this area. This is a change in something called the East Pacific Oscillation. The trough that was here, well, now it slides back over to the Bering Sea. And as that happens, that lets colder air come out and a broader trough establish itself here along the East Coast. That's what we're starting to see for the month of March, a bit of a different pattern in terms of temperatures. But nothing about this slows down weather systems coming through the southern part of the United States and then eventually coming through the Carolinas. All right, so I don't see any slowdown in that at all. The ridge still builds into this area, and we still try to hang on to some below average heights across Greenland, but the change is out west. And that's what may bring in, well, chances for some cooler conditions as we start the month of March. So that is the pattern change I wanted you to see at the beginning of this video. Elsewhere, just to finish this up, I want to let you know what's going on in South America. So we've saw over the weekend some pretty nasty storms that blew up here, especially on Sunday. That's the animation on the right. You can see these huge storms right here in and around Cordoba. That's the middle area of that circle I just drew. Those storms then moved over into parts of Uruguay, which is here creating a lot of flooding. And one of those storms produced a tornado. You can see here that as that tornado went through Cordoba, causing some damage, that this part of the world, Argentina specifically, is maybe second or third most active in terms of tornadic activity on the planet. United States being first, and I think Argentina ranking second here. But I want to finish with a map of precipitation for all of South America, because we're thinking about cotton, corn, and soybeans. The soybeans are being very quickly harvested across Mato Grosso, which is here. That's the most productive state in South America, or in Brazil, for producing corn and soybeans and cotton. And even some of the recent rain we've had there hasn't really slowed things down too much. They're about 4% ahead of normal on planting that safrinha corn and cotton crop. And even though I'm showing you wet in this area over the next 10 days, I don't think this is going to have too much of an impact on ag too much of a negative impact on ag in South America. Southern Brazil has been dry, and they're forecast to stay dry, but don't worry too much about what's going on in Argentina, simply because the heavy rains that move through there lately are going to buy quite some time if they do go over to a drier pattern to finish out the month of February. Okay, with that, I'm going to go and wrap it up right here. I hope you all have a great week, and I look forward to giving you another update next Monday. Thank you.